Okay. So, all right out of the gate, I have very little experience against c4, so I think I'm just going to go with e5. I feel like I'm playing, reverse Sicilian or something. So, let's see. Knight f6 seems pretty safe. And so I see the bishop. We're kind of focusing some fire on this d5 square. Maybe I can just get my bishop out of the chain and not bother trying to play d5. And, right. So I see here that if I move my light bishop, that my b6 pawn is going to get hit too. So I'd like to, I guess that's not super urgent. Maybe I'll just castle. Seems like it's not a huge waste of time. Okay. So attacking e5. Got one defender. Got one attacker. It's not urgent. I think that gives me time. I could move my light square bishop, but where do I really want to put it? Seems like on e6, not a ton of action. I do want to get out of the way though. I'll just move it up. And if you want to attack it with one of your pawns, it'll maybe induce some weakness or something. Take. Yeah, it's fine. So now I'm trying to decide if I want to put my knight on c6 or d7. Guess I'll just go with d7. That seems fine. Just get all these pieces out. So here, I'm going to play c6. It opens some paths for my queen, and it also helps defend the b7 pawn. Does weaken the d6 pawn, but it seems like it's hard to immediately attack that. I'm trying to figure out what might be a good plan at this point. Your pawn structure is pretty spiky, probably looking for some kind of break or something, but so h3 is interesting. I expect that. Seems weakening. I don't see immediately how to exploit it though. I can well, just go get our, let's get our rook in the game. Yeah, so that pushes me back. I considered what I would do if you played g4 there. So it's sort of similar. So I can go back in front of my king. Is it going to get cramped? Take. Not a lot of time, so I think I'm just going to move. A little more time. So I'm getting cramped. I feel like it's important to make some space here. Doesn't seem like a... Oh, hi. Okay, so that knight's propped up by the bishop. Which means I don't really want to attack with my queen. It's not directly. My bishop has nowhere to go. So where do you threat? If you take, and it's okay there. So let's see. It seems like my main problem here is finding a plan. Maybe I can attack queen side. I can get a knight to d4. That seems like a reasonable plan. Do I have a path there? Not a great one. So what if I push with a pawn? I guess another threat here is also just if you bring your queen in, but it just doesn't seem conclusive yet. Your pawns are approaching. Okay, well now that your e-pawn is blocking that diagonal, maybe I'll try and open up the side of the board a little bit. I have a lot of heavy pieces over here. Just coming in. Consider taking with the pawn, but I feel like unnecessarily weakens my defense. Plus getting my rook to 6th rank for free, as it is, seems of some value. So that's interesting. So what's the value of that? The king still on. I guess it's avoiding any potential shenanigans with bishop takes f2. Okay, so I've noticed that you can win a pawn by taking twice on b5. So I probably want to support that pawn if I'm going to keep it there. Or I could just attack. How do I follow that up? Would open your queen up, pointing at my d6 pawn. I feel like I want to do that. So maybe I'll just bring the rook into the game. A knight on c3 is surprisingly obnoxious. It seems kind of out of the game, but it still has pretty good coverage where our pieces are interacting. Okay, so see that opens this diagonal. My bishop is on. There's not really anything to do there. If I backed my bishop up with my queen, I'd like, I don't know, still not accounted anything though. Seemed like an interesting line, but so if I allow you to take, then your rook is firing on my knight. Really seem like a trade that you would want to make. If I take and you retake with your rook, you lost the defender of the e4 pawn, but still only have one attacker. You take, however, if you push, that seems bad. I don't really want to see f5. So what can I do against f5? The thing that seems great. Seems like I should take. Yeah, retake with bishop. Yeah, that seems pretty good for you. Develop that bishop. Now it's all right up in my game. Keep wanting to play knight h5 and then noticing that your queen will take it, but then later I still want to play it. All right, well, I think I'm going to bring this knight in. helps my queen defend my d6 pawn. And if you want to trade your bishop for my knight, that seems good for me. Well, so here, you're attacking my bishop. Oh yeah, I see. I let you fork my knight and my bishop. Let's sort of. Aha. Thank you. Okay. So that was a blunder. There might have been. I don't know if there's anything I could have done. Maybe there wasn't anything I could have done there. So, still want to get this pawn defended. I guess it is defended. You push, take, then it is still defended. Okay. So my thought behind this is that I can prepare b4. It's coming in. So what's the plan here? If I push b4 and you take, I take. My pawn is a little bit better positioned than yours there. You're giving up yet another bishop, but if I push the pawn and you move your knight, have I gained anything? I mean, I can still just move my bishop, but then you take my pawn, and I take. So if I put my bishop on a7, and then the pawns clear out, your rook's firing on it. So something to think about, I guess. Do you have any other choices? No, I think I'd like to keep the bishop for now. So let's do that. I do feel like I've let myself become a little crowded in now. Yeah, so there's that pawn. Thought I might like to open that up, but we'll just, so if I take, you take, being on the defensive here, need to figure out a better, it's defended by 2 pieces. It seems fine. Okay, so Wish that bishop wasn't staring at my rook. If I move the rook, drop the pawn. I'll just close it up. Yeah, I thought that was coming. What do I need? Well, I guess I can take on e4, and after you take, I'm down a lot of material, so that doesn't seem like a great choice. So I guess I can pull back and drop the pawn. Those aren't great choices. I guess in this case, you lose the exchange, but not a whole piece for nothing. That bishop was pretty strong, so I feel like at least trading that bishop for my rook in exchange for getting a nice central knight is not the end of the world. Okay, so you're focusing fire on b5. What am I going to do about it? Like, is it worth dedicating more resources to it? I guess in the short term, this seems like a good move to get my queen on a better diagonal. Well, maybe not really a better diagonal. I have no valid diagonal moves. So I play c8, drop pawn. I still can't do that. Rook c8 doesn't work. So what are my choices here? I can block things up. Allows the pawn to advance. Taking the pawn. Oh, that's the defender of the knight. That makes sense. I don't know if I have anything way better to do than recapture. Okay, so forcing exchange down of materials. So I have anything better to do than to take you up on that offer. If you're take, not super great for me, but do I have something better? I feel like if I take on c4, I'm basically saying that the best I'm going to play for is a draw, and even that's a little dicey. I'm down 3 points, so probably want to keep my queen. Oh, oops, that was dumb. I saw that right after I was like, I'll just make him capture, and then I can recapture with the rook. And then as I was doing it, I was like, there's nothing on my back rank.
Oh, no. Here's the thing. Let's start by the beginning. c4, e5, this is just okay. Knight f6, bishop c5. Makes sense. Perfectly playable for the moment. Nobody's dying. Okay, just finishing the development, getting your pieces to normal squares. But the problem with going out with this bishop of c8 is that often this pawn on b7 is really weak, so you have to be really careful with that, because there might be some tactics here. So kinda depends on the player, but people usually leaves the bishop on c8 for a while to stop any tactics on b7, which might be annoying. And then before playing bishop f5, a lot of people will play c6, as you did like in the future, but before, so that there are no tactics on b7. Does that make sense?
Right. I thought I could get away with it for a turn because you blocked it with your knight.
Yeah, for the moment it is okay, so nobody dies, just a little thought here that maybe b7 is kind of weak, but you have to be really careful with that, right? Bishop f5, just okay for the moment, nobody dies. Here there might be some tactics with something like knight takes e5, but this is not working, because after d takes, bishop takes, knight e7 or something, then you can recapture with your queen and it is okay for you. So knight takes e5 is no good in this position. I calculated knight takes e5, but it's not gonna fly. Another way to proceed might have been knight h4, which is really annoying, and which is basically forcing you to go to c8. So yeah, that's kinda annoying, you know. So you have to go backwards, and then I have probably moved my knight to h4, which is not so good at the moment, but it might work for me if I want to play f4 in the future or something. Maybe probably I will just have to come back with my knight. So I decided that I didn't want to do that. So for the moment, just okay. Nobody's.
I was concerned. I wanted to develop my knight, but I didn't want to play c6 and take away that.
Okay, that's something that's interesting, you know. The problem is that if you play knight c6, then there is still a lot of X-rays on b7. So if you play knight c6, I might play in the future a3, b4, and then probably b5, winning a lot of tempi on your pieces here. So that might be really annoying for your position. I do believe that the way that you proceeded is probably one of the best ways to proceed, which is developing your knight to d7 and then play c6, because you're stopping me from getting a lot of tempi here with a3, b4, b5, which is really annoying. And in the future, well, my idea will be to create a debility on c6 with b5, probably bring my rook to b1 and try to exploit this file here if it ever gets open. So if you play knight c6, let's imagine, for example, just a normal move here, castling, knight c6, a3, maybe a5 makes sense, but even then, I'm not quite sure. Probably instead even knight here, taking your pair of bishops. That's something that you didn't say on the whole game, you know, like you never said, oh, the pair of bishops is, the pair of bishops that, and you have to be considering that, you know, because the position is going to be open, and if I get to trade one of your bishops for one of my knights, then I get into a position where I have a little advantage in terms of the pair of bishops, because they have a better mobility in this kinds of position, basically. Does that make sense?
Right. So on turn on move 6 though, what are your thoughts about playing knight d7 immediately before developing the light square bishop?
I do believe it's okay, because often when you play knight b7 before developing your bishop, the problem is that your bishop is kinda out of the game, and it's gonna take you a while to get it out. That's like the bad side of it. The good side of it is that you're still keeping an eye on b7, so that nobody can like sacrifice you or do something weird with these kind of things in the future and whatever, right? That's good. So maybe here I miss a little tactic now that I'm thinking about it. After knight b7, I kind of missed that now I had knight h4, and when you move your bishop, then I'm taking on b7, you know? I missed this tactic here. It's curious because I actually saw that before, and I thought that you had to move your bishop to c8. But probably here I'm winning just a pawn, which is clear now that I'm seeing the position one more time. So this is exactly the problem that you're facing, right? This is what we have been talking about for a while. Instead of doing knight d7 here, c6 just.
C6 first, yeah.
Exactly. Even c6 before moving your bishop to f5 might make some sense. The idea is that you do not have to be constantly calculating these things, and you do not have to be worried about this pawn on b7, which is really annoying in these English games. So that's one point that you have to be careful with. So knight b7, see how now in this position knight h4 is practically winning a pawn on b7, which I didn't see at this point, which is kind of silly, but this was a tactic which was really simple and winning a pawn. So no good for you, knight b7. c6 better, even knight c6, but the knight c6 is a move that I do not like in this position. The idea is that the knight on c6 might be taken advantage of. Also, in this position, usually people try to play c6 and then d5 to control the center. So that might be one of your ideas, you know? Also, something that I want to tell you here is that you haven't created a plan here. Because you told me that you were creating a plan, or that you needed to create a plan here in the move 11. So, no good. You have to have a plan from the opening. You know, you need to have an idea of what do you want to do. So more or less here, you already need to know what you want to do, right? Not necessarily that you know all the moves that you're gonna do, but you need to have a more or less decent idea of what do you want to do with your pieces in the future. Because otherwise, it is common that if you do not have a plan, what's gonna happen is that your pieces are gonna be misplaced. So you do not want that, right? Basically, if you want to create a plan before the problems start to occur, because if you create a plan after the problems start, or after the problems already exist in the position, then you might face a lot of trouble. You do not solve problems in chess once you have the problems, you solve the problems before the problems occur. That's the whole idea of chess. So g3, bishop c5, knight f3, well, okay, this is okay. Little tactic here, a3. The idea of a3 is that now I'm threatening b4, and this is just common in these kinds of position, threatening b4, and then more or less usually when people play c6, the idea is to play b5, and then try to generate a lot of pressure here and generate that ability. So that's more or less my idea. You play in this position c6, which makes sense. If I play b4, then you have this square to go with your bishop. In some other positions, you might go to even c7 with the idea of defending your pawn on e5. So, okay, h3. Now, I do not have the tactic also on b7. That's good, right? h3, okay, rook e8, e4. So the idea here is that I was waiting for you to play rook e8 to close it, you know, because to close the file. Because once you put your rook here, that means that your rook will be better if the position gets open, or at least if this line gets open. So I thought, nah, I don't want that. I'm gonna close that, and I'm gonna play as if I were playing kind of an King's Indian defense, basically. So after I play e4, it looks like a King's Indian defense, but with a pawn on c4, which is usually on c3. So it might seem kind of weird, but it's giving me a lot of space. So my idea now is to play king h2, give a, getting away from this pin, and play f4, and try to play like if we were in a King's Indian position. So that might be kind of annoying, yeah?
Just to take a step back, what was the point behind h3? Is that just to make room for your king?
Okay, h3 has a couple of ideas, you know. First of all, if something that you didn't notice is that I wanted your pair of bishops. So h3 is taking this square for your bishop. That's one of the ideas. Like, let's imagine that if in this position I play this, then you go like here, here, and you can come here. And then I'm not taking your pair of bishops. And if I play g4, that's kind of over expanding my position. I don't want to do that. So then you can go to g6, and if I play like something like this, it's not something that I want to do. I think it's kind of premature, and there might be some tactics like knight takes, and then suddenly you have these kind of things which are like dangerous. So h3 is taking away this square for your bishop, so that when your bishop goes backwards, like let's say g6, e6, I am playing knight d5 if you go to e6, and then I'm taking your pair of bishops, and if you go to g6, then I'm playing knight h4, I'm taking your pair of bishops. So that's one of the ideas. Another idea is that I'm giving some room to my king. Often in King's Indian's attack, you want your king to go to h2. The idea behind that is that your king is really safe next to your bishop, and then you can play f4. Your king is really safe like in these little bots that you have around of your king. So that's something that you usually will see in King's Indian attacks, King's Indian defense. The king's gonna go to h2, and after doing so, the knight is gonna go to h4, and afterwards something like e4, f4 is gonna happen. So that's more or less the idea behind h3. It kind of seems like an innocent move, kind of a silly move, but there is an idea behind it. So h3, rook e8, now e4. The position is blocked. Now your rook doesn't make like that much sense on e8. That's good for me. And bishop d6. And one more time, when I played knight g5, you said, "Oh, maybe I should start to try to find a plan here." So one more time, it's really important. Find a plan before all of these things are happening, because now I'm getting a little advantage here after you take your pair of bishops, and I'm getting into a more or less like decent position for me. Also, another thing that you have to consider is that you should always be thinking about your pair of bishops. Not necessarily that if you have to give the pair of bishops away, you're gonna give a piece away or something. No, but it is just a little advantage that it's gonna add up to the end of the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
So bishop e6, and now you played b5. b5 is losing a pawn just after c takes, d takes, and knight takes.
I realized afterwards you can just take twice on b5 or down a pawn.
Yeah, I didn't want to take on b5 because I thought, well, if I take there, then I'm kind of just winning a pawn, like clearly. I wanted to see if you were gonna see that you were losing the pawn, and I thought, nah, I don't want to take on b5. I'm gonna wait to see if you see that you're losing the pawn, and actually you did. After I played king h2. Also, something that I am doing if I do not take on b5, which wasn't my idea, but which also makes sense, is that if you take here, then at least I have a really decent center here, and I'm playing f4, f5 one more time, or just finishing my development, okay, and my pawn is just protecting the square d5. So I think it's okay at the same point. Like, I'm not taking the pawn, that should be the best move in this position, but I wanted to see if you could notice that you were losing the pawn here. Just after, you know, all these things happening here with a5, I like the fact that you noticed and you played rook b8 immediately. So that was cool. f4, pawn takes, bishop takes. Here you played knight e5. Really bad mistake here. You're just losing the piece basically after a fork, so that's no good. Constantly be thinking what's gonna happen, you know, because I think that you're thinking too much about your own moves, but you're not considering the moves of your rival, of your opponent. Does that make sense? Because because you're saying a lot like, my piece should be better here, my piece should be better there, my piece is doing something cool here, my piece is this, my pawn this, my pawn this, and all my. But be thinking about the other moves, like the moves that the other guy has, because you're not playing chess alone, and if you do not take into account the move of the other guy, then suddenly you lose, because you are not reacting, or you are not acting upon the reality of the position. You're just acting to half of the position, which is just your pieces. Does that make sense?
It does.
So extremely important, be constantly asking yourself, what's the other guy thinking? What's the idea behind the other guy position? Why is he doing this thing? Also, on planning, I created a video that I uploaded to the channel. I think that might be helpful for you, so that you get a better sense of how to create a plan and how to take, let's say, strategical ideas in your position. So f4, it takes f4, bishop takes f4, and now a5. Well, a5 is a move that makes sense to a certain extent, I guess, because you're playing b4. But on the other hand, I want you to be thinking constantly too about the center, you know, because you're not thinking that much about the center either. Like, you have to be considering space, you have to be considering time, you know. Those are like the fundamental things of chess: space and time. In this position, I am controlling the center like totally after I play d4, and that's extremely dangerous for you. Also, if I take on b5, then there is a problem in your position, which is that this pawn here is gonna be extremely weak. This is gonna be an isolated queen's pawn, and it's gonna be on d6. So usually when you have an isolated queen's pawn is on d5, where you have some control of the center. If the pawn is on d6, then it is really passive usually. So that's no good. After I take on b5, see how this pawn on d6 is gonna fall in the future, and also I am controlling the center totally. The whole idea of controlling the center is that the guy who controls the center has more mobility. If you do not have the control of the center, then basically your pieces cannot move as much as mine. If I have more space to move, then it is harder for you to find a good answer to my moves. And eventually it's gonna be like a boa, you know, like this snake which is coming and just embracing you, and finally it kills you. That's the problem of not having a space. Like if you go and you do not have a space, and suddenly you get into a position where the snake is just embracing you, you die. So space, extremely important. Be constantly thinking, what are you doing with your position? What is the situation with the center? I also see something interesting here. That is that I'm trading this pawn here, and also now this pawn which was on c6 now is on b5, and it's not in the center anymore. So I'm basically playing d4, d5. That leaves some holes here in the future which might be taken advantage of. Some things that you have to be really and extremely careful with, right?
Yeah.
So d4, bishop a7, b4. Here I think that I just could have taken the pawn on d6, but I am not in a rush. I remember that once I was watching a game of two really strong players, and one of them had the chance to take the pawn to take a pawn which was just hanging around. And after the game I asked him why he didn't take it right away. He said, I didn't need to take the pawn right away because he waited like fucking 15 moves to take the pawn. And I asked him, why didn't you take the pawn? And he said, because the pawn was already mine. There is no way I'm not taking the pawn in the future. So that was really smart from him. That doesn't work a lot of the time, you know. It's not like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take the pawn in 15 moves. But in that position, actually, it worked. So he said, I'm not in a hurry to take the pawn because the pawn is already mine. In this position, I'm not in a hurry to take the pawn on d6 because the pawn is already mine. There's no way for you to stop me taking the pawn in a lot of moves, maybe. Even if I do not take it right now, in the future, it's gonna fall. So that's something that you have to consider here. Like, I played before because I wanted to stop you from getting any ideas. Also, you said that you wanted to play b4, you know, and you wanted to open the line. But I'm not quite sure if you want to open the line here, because if you open the line, you're opening the line from a rook, and you actually noticed that you said before that your bishop on a7 might have some problems in the future if the line went open or got open, and that might be dangerous for you. But now you're thinking about opening the line, and actually that's no good because my rook is gonna get a lot of activity. So be concerned about these things. Try to make the moves which are not giving the other guy a lot of activity, because if you do so, then you're helping him. So important. Before a4 and now d5. The pawn is falling. I do not quite understand why you do not just give a pawn here, and you're giving the quality also. So maybe just rook e8 and hope for the best, because this is something that I see a lot. People often are like in a position which is not so good, and then they decide to give everything away. So in this position, probably rook e8 makes sense, and when I take here, I don't know, maybe just rook c8 and hope for the best. The position is kind of collapsing, but at the same time, well, you have to try to hold this. Maybe after e5, yeah, you're kind of in a hard position, but maybe e5, rook takes c3, for example. So it is not so clear now. And also if e5, you're still protecting the position, so it's not so clear. Maybe just queen d3 might be something that makes sense, or I'm just taking on b5. But at the same time, do not just give all your pieces away, because if you do so, then, well, the position falls. In this position, maybe rook e5 makes sense because the control of the center is going to be too much, but just a little tip there. Bishop takes, knight takes, queen e2, queen d7, rook c1, and now here it's just a little tactic on b5, nothing really crazy, and finally this is just a checkmate here. But the result of the game doesn't really matter, like, at all. What matters is that you should be correcting these things that I'm telling you, and you should be like taking notes on them and trying to figure out if you're committing the same mistake on other games, right? See how not controlling the center is gonna give you a lot of trouble in the future. Here in this position you have a decent control of the center, and you slowly are losing it. You know, you have to be constantly thinking, how can I keep the control of the center? How can my pieces be active? What's the other guy playing? What's his idea? You have to try to predict this. It's kind of like trying to predict the future, but in chess it works because you have the information, right? It's not like in poker, which sometimes works, but sometimes you're ground because you do not have all the information on the board. Here you have all the information. Be constantly thinking, be constantly asking, be constantly wondering what's going on with his pieces, with his plans, what are his ideas. I'll totally recommend you one more time to watch the video on plans, because that's gonna help you a lot. I do believe so. So that's basically what it is. I kind of have to go now, but I really like this game actually, and I think it was a lot of fun. So if you like this, make sure you, I don't know, leave a comment, share this with some people who might find this useful, so other people can get benefits out of this. And if you have any feedback, any comments, I will appreciate them.
Great. Well, thanks for your time, Paul.